Good morning. I'm David Johnson. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, which is a statewide organization of our state's leading companies and research institutions and philanthropic foundations. We have been around for about 21, 22 years, and in that time have done a number of things in advancing Indiana's economic development. Perhaps the most important aspect of our work is that it is always research-driven, data-driven, and we look at the entire state's economy through many lenses and in many ways. The report that we have done here with our colleagues at the Brookings Institution and the American Enterprise Institute is the most ambitious study that we have ever done, and indeed I think it is the most ambitious study that anyone has ever done on Indiana's economy. Our particular focus as an organization, and so many of you with us here today have been directly involved in this study, has been on Indiana's advanced industries, which are the industries that are technology driven. They are our innovation industries. They're highly productive industries. They're very dependent upon technology and talent, and they are found everywhere throughout all of Indiana's 92 counties and in every region of the state. And so the purpose of this study was to look at those industries where we find them in 11 regions of Indiana, and to work with all of you to identify what our strengths are and what our challenges are in preserving those industries moving ahead, and also in asking broader questions about the nature of work in Indiana today, whether people are in advanced industries or whether they're in other jobs, how to make those jobs better, how to sustain them in the future, and how to build more of them to drive Indiana's economy even more aggressively forward into the future. This is, again, a major effort. We are very grateful to the Lilly Endowment for making this study possible. It has been going on, as I think all of you here know, because again, so many of you have participated in it for nearly 18 months. And so it's great to have a chance to be with you here this morning, to bring to you directly the people who have put these studies together, and to give you a preview of all of the information that you will find on the website and the many good things that lie ahead to do with this great new contribution to Indiana's economy and Indiana's knowledge base. So we hope you've had a chance to go to the website. We will give you more information about that over the course of our time here together. What we're going to do is hear from both Mark Muro at the Brookings Institution and Ryan Streeter at the American Enterprise Institute. They're going to give some overviews of the work that they have just concluded. And then we're going to go to a panel discussion with stakeholders to dig deeper into the report, during which time you're going to have a chance to ask questions and answer and get answers from the panelists and from the authors of this work. So without any further delay, because we have a lot to cover here, let me introduce Mark Muro, who is the Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution's Metropolitan Policy Program, someone we have worked with for many years, and again, the proud author, along with his colleague Rob Maxim, of a great piece of work. Mark, take it away and give us a preview of the conversation to come.
Yeah, thanks so much, David, and thanks everybody for joining us, having us into your studies and home offices and so on. Speaking for my colleague, Rob Maxim, and I just want to say how much we've appreciated our conversations with many of you in just a very sincere way. One of the most encouraging things we've learned this year is that Indiana is really rich with dedicated local and regional leaders doing incredible work. So shout out to you and thank you for all of the help all along. So David's giving you some good background. I just, what we thought we'd do is give you a quick feel for the outline of the report and some of the key points, and go from there. And then we'll hear from Ryan. Let's jump right into the next slide here. I want to start with the current moment. Our first finding really is that Indiana actually possesses a degree of momentum as it moves beyond what is hopefully the worst of the pandemic. Indiana's actually had a relatively strong recovery, which is one of our first findings, and we have you down for the 9th fastest employment rebound in 2020, given your reduction of pandemic losses to 43,000 positions, which is a lot, obviously, but it amounts to about minus 1.7% loss from February. So a lot of jobs have come back, which is encouraging. And what's interesting is how much of that, how much industry structure has helped you. Your number 10 specialization in transportation, logistics, fulfillment among states has been helpful since the back end of the e-commerce boom has been booming in your delivery realm. Number 2, specialization in pharmaceuticals, medicine manufacturing. That's been a good place to be. And number 2, specialization in medical equipment. So this is all good stuff. And that's where we start our analysis. And yet, while the understandable impulse, given this good news, is to maybe look forward to getting back to normal and simply wait for normal and celebrate it, which you should, we would suggest that hoping for a return to the pre-virus normalcy would not be the wisest course or aspiration for the state going forward. Now, let's go to the next slide. We know that the crisis has highlighted what we call pre-existing conditions, longer-term challenges that raise questions about the way forward for the state and its regions. While employment growth has been modest but acceptable, I think you could say above average for slow-growing Midwestern states, but not lighting it up by national terms. Earnings growth has underperformed. There's no way around that. Median earnings rose by just 0.3% a year in the last decade, half the national pace, to reach just 34,000. And looking back farther, employment growth has been knocked down from the national pace by each recession since 2000. And pay growth has lagged substantially over this time. Since 2000, Indiana's 0.5% annual real median growth ranked just 46th among states. Let's go to the next slide. Tied up with these subpar trends are regional divides. While low pay means that about 30% of Hoosiers statewide have been living in a struggling family, as defined by the University of Washington's well-regarded standard, Indiana is struggling with disparate growth trends across places. Here you can see how this looks for employment growth, which is just one metric. You can check out on the interactive data map on our report website, which we'll show you more directly later. But you can see here that Indiana regions are growing at sharply different rates, ranging from 1.1% a year in central Indiana. You can see the top bar and at the center of your state. But we have been seeing minus 0.3% growth in East and West Central. This is an accentuated trend. This reflects trends that are going on across the country, but you have a serious expression of this kind of division. And let's go to the next slide. That is not the only aspect of the divergence trend that you can see. Here you can see that several decades of deindustrialization, slow recovery from recessions, and regional divergence are taking a toll on community health across the state. Here we've employed an updated community stress score from our friends at EIG, our partners in this work, along with AAI. And you can see that this is assembled out of county information on a variety of measures, from adults without a high school degree to housing vacancy, non-working rate, poverty rate, median income. You can see, this patchwork, an uneven patchwork of county well-being is becoming, a sharp aspect of the state's reality. So these are some of the what we call pre-existing conditions. The bottom line, I think, is that the good times that preceded the crisis were a mixed bag. going back to them isn't enough in itself. Instead, we should try and understand what was causing the pre-existing conditions and seek to address those. And that's sort of been the way we have thought about this project. So here, we've identified underlying weaknesses affecting some three success factors familiar from our broader work at Brookings, and looked at those. So I want to look at those quickly, and then we'll talk about the way forward. Let's look at the underlying weaknesses. Go to the next slide. To begin with, we show that the state's industrial competitiveness reflected in productivity trends has been slipping. And this is concerning for a state that has incredible wealth of advanced sector activity, especially in the manufacturing side. But this extends to the whole economy, and it's a problem because productivity is critical. It's the source of competitiveness, yes, but it's also a prerequisite for good paying jobs. Absent productivity growth, good paying jobs are not possible. So, and you can see here on the left, productivity is declining to levels below the US level from a level above that. What's going on here? We think insufficient investment, especially in digital adoption, may be limiting productivity along with education issues, and with it, worker and family well-being. You can see on the right, Indiana's advanced sector firms per worker capital expenditures for IT rank about 37th in the country, not good enough. And when you can see the significantly higher investment levels on that measure in competitors like Ohio and Michigan. And then I should add that broadband adoption is a related part of this issue. It's increased from 60 to 65% since 2013, so that's progress, but adoption still remains in the fourth quintile of states. So the state has digital challenges. Meanwhile, let's go to the next slide. The state has proven susceptible to economic shifts that have created multiple what we call adjustment challenges for firms and workers. Arguably, this has deeply shaped dynamics in your state. Most notably, you can see here that the state underwent a massive shift of work away from middle-skilled jobs towards lower-pay service work that has forced thousands of workers to struggle to manage the transition. Now the pandemic recession poses potential new shifts and disruptions that could complicate adjustment, uncertain demand, automation, skills deficits, as well as the state's shortage of new firm and quality job creation. So that's the second challenge, managing transition. The state needs to do better and build in responses to that. Finally, let's look at the third area. The economy has been providing simply too few good jobs. Let's go to the next slide. Good quality jobs are critical to provide workers and families livelihoods and dignity. For that reason, Brookings success suggests that good jobs pay at least a locally adjusted $40,000, $700 a year. That's the national level. That should be locally adjusted for each region, and we do that in the report that you could obtain those levels for all 11 regions, and provide employer-sponsored health insurance. However, Indiana's stock of these good jobs remains too small and too slow growing. Only 42% of Hoosiers are in good jobs. It's not a terrible performance by national standards, but we think it's simply insufficient for a state with aspirations. And among certain groups, that number is even lower. Less than 33% of women, less than 30% of Black workers, and just 25% of Hispanic or Latino workers in Indiana are in a good job. Nor has the number of Hoosiers in good jobs increased appreciably in the last decade. It remains almost exactly where it was in the beginning of the decade. So the shortage of good jobs is the third underlying issue that we think the state should focus on. These are the concerns we prioritize in the report. So let's move on. As to possible responses, we think the state should use the recovery period to begin addressing these issues. Let's go to the next slide. Simply waiting for a serviceable recovery fueled by federal stimulus will get you more of the same rather than something better than before. So to that end, we advance a number of recommendations pitched to varying time horizons for promoting deeper renewal. I won't go into a ton of detail on all of these, but beyond saying that we think the challenges raised by underlying issues point to three broad responses. So three major underlying issues, three major response areas. One, keep up on digital adoption to drive productivity, good jobs, and dynamism. That flows directly. Promote favorable job creation and worker transitions to allow beneficial rewiring of the economy, adjustment in downtimes like these, and smoother transitions from less desirable to more desirable arrangements for firms and workers. And then do more to support workers who aren't in good jobs in order to promote inclusion and broadly shared prosperity. Let's go to the next slide. And here's a look at our recs ranged across the three themes. Again, we won't barrage you with all of this now, but we do want to touch on a few of our recommendations that are maybe relevant to things especially important to regional leaders and citizens. On digital adoption, we've all year liked the IEDC's direction with its EASE agenda with the manufacturing readiness grants in it, which we think respond to the idea that the economy is changing and firms need to update their processes. But we think the state should go much farther on industry modernization and make that a central theme of its activities. I think the state should build on the readiness grants, but go further by expanding and extending them, complementing them with major tech adoption awareness initiatives, complementing with digital skills initiatives, such as by promoting tech in the Indiana College Corps, complementing the grants with grant availabilities for service firms, not just manufacturing ones. And then complementing all of this with a range of business support, expert service, and technical assistance offerings to help operators improve their work, become familiar with technology and adopting it. And you can leverage a lot of available expertise in this state, whether at Connexus, the universities, Purdue MEP, the INMAC Center there, Notre Dame, Rose-Hulman, Vincennes, all have serious specializations in some of these issues. So we have a whole memo on these ideas we'd be happy to share, but that's one initiative. Meanwhile, we think it's essential the state put in place some kind of regional growth initiative focused on quality job creation and workforce development. You saw the divergent story. You're fortunate to have 11 vibrant, really diverse and economies, but you need to make sure that they are all being supported and nurtured. We think it's essential that the state put in place some kind of initiative responding to that need. We think the governor's on the right track here with the regional recovery idea and the state of the state, and we have a major proposal of our own that support for efforts of this sort. We've been very impressed by the ferment around regional strategies in the state, and our national work reinforces that local regions are the right geography for problem solving and solutions. Following on the regional cities effort with the program heavily focused on quality job creation, and workforce development, advanced sector development feels like a real winner to us. So we have some ideas for this that may help. Along these lines, we might suggest stressing an advanced industries quality job emphasis that would support work with industry university partnerships, workforce development, supply chain deepening, technical advice to small firms, entrepreneurial services, and then really leveraging the regional economic development organizations that are in the communities and giving them a lot of bottom-up discretion to work out these solutions. Anyway, we'd be happy to talk this over more and hope it comes up later in the day, and we could share our memo on this too. But beyond these ideas, we think these are two core ideas, but there are a couple others we want to touch on. I think broadband and entrepreneurship are timely and tied to the digital adoption agenda and also to the regional growth focus. So given that, I want to ask my colleague, Rob Maxim, to touch on a few more of our ideas, after which I think we'll toggle back and hear from Ryan. Rob?
Hey, thanks, Mark. I'll just go through these pretty quickly for everyone. So just to level set here with context on we saw broadband as a policy imperative even before the downturn. When we conducted our first round of listening sessions in Indiana, at this point nearly a year ago, before the onset of coronavirus, as weird as that sounds, widespread adoption of remote work and learning, which wasn't really a thing yet. It was in its kind of nascency. Despite that, we consistently heard that broadband was one of the most significant needs for Hoosiers. And obviously, since the start of the crisis, we're now relying on the internet for nearly every aspect of our life. But many in Indiana are still disconnected. Based on census data, we estimate that as many as 950,000 total households in Indiana don't have wireline broadband access. That obviously creates a significant barrier to distance learning, telework, and other online aspects of our lives. And within those households, there are over 200,000 school-aged children, many of whom face challenges to distance learning. And obviously, like so many other issues, there are issues of equity when it comes to broadband access. Research from Ball State found that single-parent households, households with parents not in the workforce, low-income households, and households who don't speak English at home are all far less likely to have internet access than other households in Indiana. Obviously there are a variety of admirable regional efforts underway to increase broadband access in the state. In a moment, you're going to hear from Claire Fiddian-Green, who'll be able to take you through one of the really innovative county-level e-learning pilots going on. Another example I've heard that's particularly impressive is, the ongoing effort by the Wabash Heartland Innovation Network to leverage Spectra in new ways to increase rural broadband availability, including by piloting programs to deliver high-speed internet service via Aerostat blimp. And importantly, too, regions are focusing on digital equity. The Regional Opportunity Initiatives is working with the Purdue Center for Regional Development to develop an 11-county digital inclusion plan in the Indiana Uplands region to address broadband gaps there. But all of these efforts could be supported and potentially more effective and impactful with state support. So we recommend several policies that the state can take to help these efforts, including a new round of GEAR grants and Next Level Connection broadband grants made directly to communities. We also think the state should explore dedicated long-term funding streams for continued support for broadband investment. One that we recommend is modernizing the Indiana Universal Service Fund to support greater broadband infrastructure investment in the state. In terms of entrepreneurship, even with robust job growth in areas like the advanced industry sector that Mark addressed, most jobs in the state are not going to be advanced industries jobs. And while Indiana generally ranks well on ease of doing business rankings, those rankings have not always translated into new business or job creation. In fact, research from the Economic Innovation Group, one of our partners on this project, places Indiana 46th in the nation when it comes to share of employees working at young firms. This matters because economic literature shows that higher levels of entrepreneurship can enhance regions' resilience, and it also matters for reasons of economic inclusion. A variety of structural gaps still exist across race and gender lines when it comes to entrepreneurship and small business opportunities in Indiana. Right now the state has regional infrastructure to support small businesses and entrepreneurs. During the midst of a crisis, there were a number of regional efforts to support small businesses with emergency loans, which were essential, particularly for companies that couldn't access federal PPP loans. And regions and cities have always been the most natural nexus for business development. Indiana's regional small business development centers are doing important work to help would-be entrepreneurs, but they're chronically underfunded by the state and federal governments. They typically rely on just a small amount of pass-through federal revenue. And on the entrepreneurship finance side, there are a variety of community development finance institutions working in communities statewide to increase capital for entrepreneurs. These include regional efforts, such as, Renew Indianapolis's Build Fund, as well as organizations like Bankable, which is working with entrepreneurs and small businesses across the state. So here too, we think all of these efforts could be made more robust with dedicated state support. So we recommend, the state explore a number of policies, such as establishing a state level Cdfi fund and, enhancing the state small business development center funding to provide more regionally oriented support for entrepreneurs. So back to you, Mark, unless there's anything else you'd like me to add there.
No, absolutely. That very helpful, Rob. So yeah, these are just a few of the ideas. Many of these are supported by extensive detailed memos as you think about picking the ball up in particular areas. But with that, I think we're going to head back to hear from Ryan Streeter next.
And let me introduce Ryan. Mark and Rob, thanks very much. That was a terrific overview. And again, the report, your report is just a treasure trove of data, information, and findings. And we're really looking forward to people having greater access to it and many great conversations and actions to come from it. The GPS study, in addition to the Brookings report that we've just heard from Mark about, also includes 3 studies from the American Enterprise Institute that really are companion works, and the entire body of work is unprecedented again for Indiana. The person who has put the AEI part of this together is a long-term Hoosier and friend of ours. He is the Director of Domestic Policy Studies for the American Enterprise Institute, and in a former life here in Indiana, had a great deal to do with the Regional Cities program in Indiana. And Ryan, at the conclusion of your comments here, I want to come back to talking about the regional efforts just a moment, and Mark touched on those as well to have an introduction to some of the rest of our conversation today. But Ryan, if you can give us an overview of the AEI work here and how it kind of all fits together into the picture we're talking about, that would be terrific. Welcome.
Great, thanks, David, for that introduction, and good to be with all of you. Good morning to you. As David said, I'm originally a Hoosier myself. I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, but have family in Indiana, and still think of it as home. So this is more than just an academic exercise. There's a personal element to this project, which was rewarding too. As David mentioned, the American Enterprise Institute, where I am, has provided some complementary studies to what our friends and colleagues at Brookings, Mark and Rob, have put together and have shared with you. And their analysis is really the centerpiece of this whole project, looking at what it's going to take to bring Indiana's economy to the next level. And what we've done at AEI is complemented that work with 3 studies, which I'll just go through the findings in brief with you here, and then we can move to a discussion. And as against the backdrop of something that Mark and Rob were talking about that I wanted to just draw quick attention to, and that is there's sometimes when states and cities or regions are looking to their future, they look around the country to see who they can sort of copy, who they can mimic, who they can try to be like, which places are growing, which places seem dynamic, who can we mimic. But when you really look at why cities, regions, and states grow, it's because they do things that are unique to them. They build upon inherent capacities that are part of their history, that are part of why they have the kind of balance in their economy that they do. And I think one of the really valuable things that Brookings has done in this this project, which Mark and Rob were walking through, is to really look at how Indiana can build upon the assets that it has and go to that next level, not try to necessarily import things that would be new or alien to Indiana, but rather building with what the state already has done and where its strengths lie. One of the reasons that's important is that you also want to build upon sort of the tacit awareness and knowledge and history that people have, because that's what people are proud of. That's what people are enthusiastic about. And I bring that point up because I think it's important to highlight that people's attitudes about the future matter a lot to regional economies. There's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that in places where you have high levels of aspiration, where you have the ability to dream and operate on those dreams, you have more economic productivity and activity. I mean, there is something beyond just traditional economic measures to what you would call a boom town. Some cities that are growing rapidly in America are growing because their economies are really good, but they also have lots of other things to recommend themselves so that people can not just find a good job, but also build a good life. So we wanted to look at three different areas that complement what Brookings did, that kind of look at trends over time to help guide us to some of these conclusions about the kind of state that Indiana can continue to be and can grow into. And so we've done a demographic analysis of the state, kind of modeling using a relatively well-known modeling method to demographers that looks at a number of different scenarios, and I'll just give you some top lines there. We also did a survey of Hoosier attitudes about the state, about the future, compared to national averages. And then we also did a deep dive with our research partner, the Economic Innovation Group, EIG, on Indiana's more distressed communities that would be encompassed now within opportunity zones. And so I'll give you some top line findings from those three reports, and then we can move into a discussion. On the demographic front, the report was actually titled A Time to Choose because Indiana is in a unique situation where some of the trends that you see nationally, like declining fertility rates, an aging population, are true in Indiana. Indiana's at a point where you've got about a decade window to reverse some of the negative trends and try to build on things that are positive. The birth rate has fallen in Indiana like it has across the country, but it's still above the national average. And so that's a good thing, but it is something to be concerned about because with declining fertility rates, you basically you load up a lot of costs on the back end of people's lifespans that the younger generation needs to support, and that can, as we've seen in other countries, that can become quite dangerous over time. So it's facing America as a whole. It's also facing Indiana. The scenario in Indiana today can be described as one characterized by this issue of falling fertility in an aging population. Also, as has been widely covered, waves of deaths of despair, and which have also impacted its demographic future, but also, at least in some places, some positive signs on the migration front. Our modeling suggests that Indiana's population under current trends will top out around 7 million people in the late 2030s, so that's not too far from now, and then to gradually start to decline, and that decline will disguise the swift aging of the population. As I think is well known, the center part of the state, the area in and around Indianapolis, has been growing as a share of Indiana's population over time. Over the last 50 years, it's grown by 33% in terms of the share of the population, up to close to 30%. And it looks like in another generation, it could be home to about half of the state's population. So that creates some real regional imbalances as well. There are three things that affect population change: mortality, fertility, and migration. And addressing mortality is best addressed, as is already the case in many places in Indiana through multiple efforts, to deal with life-shortening types of things, primarily diabetes and related conditions, and other problems related to bad health. And so I know this is known and people are aware of this in Indiana, but doing better on the health front game is key to addressing mortality. Addressing fertility is a bit more challenging. There's mixed results when it comes to public policy responses to try to encourage people to have more children. That's often difficult to do. That can be addressed maybe even more effectively through public campaigns, but also related types of policy initiatives, such as the duration of education, the cost of housing, and those sorts of things, which Indiana really has going for it in its favor. Which brings me to the third point, which is migration. one of the reasons people move around, domestic migration, and where immigrants, and there's some new research that I've seen that hasn't been published yet coming out on where first-generation immigrants are moving, even though they first arrive in America in big cities like New York and Los Angeles, typically then fan out across the country, and they go to places that have not only a good and growing job base, but are places that are easy to start a business, since a lot of immigrants are sole proprietors or entrepreneurs, and then also the cost of housing. And so these are the kinds of things, and right now we're really seeing across the country and during the pandemic, but this was evident before the pandemic, people have been leaving overly expensive, overly bureaucratized large cities and moving to places that are more dynamic and vibrant and easier to buy a home, easier to move in close to a school that's good for your child, a growing job base, and the like. And so to the extent that regions can combine those qualities, they become attractive destinations. And it's really the appeal to migrants, both domestic and foreign, that is the best probably ticket forward for Indiana to kind of reverse some of the demographic trends, to get a bit of a younger population, to slow the the balance in the direction of an aging population. The second study that we did, the survey of Hoosier attitudes, was a large sample representative of the state and the country, and we found that on the positive side, that people in Indiana are just as entrepreneurial, or just as willing to take risks, to start businesses, to venture out on their own as the national average. I remember when I was in Indiana, there were sometimes these discussions about whether or not Hoosiers themselves were less entrepreneurial than others, and how that was going to affect the economy. And certainly, when you look at the rate of new firm formation, that's your absolute empirical indicator of how Hoosiers are doing. But when it comes to openness to risk and a willingness to try to venture out at some point in your life to start something, Hoosiers are relatively positive there. They're very positive on the place that Indiana is for raising a family and building a life. And so a sense of economic optimism and a sense of quality of life is also very strong in Indiana, and that's a good thing. On the negative front, or things to be concerned about, the one that jumped out to us, and I know our colleagues in this project the most, was that by a considerably higher rate, people in Indiana don't believe that a college education is necessary to get ahead today compared to the past. And that's about 3/4 of Hoosiers, compared to only about 60% or a little more than that nationally. So that's a big gap. And perhaps more concerning is that younger Hoosiers are surprisingly of this view, more than older Hoosiers. This view that is really kind of a holdover, I think, from a manufacturing and agricultural past, but is a mindset and a view to the future that Indiana would do well to change. When it comes to schools themselves, K through 12 schools, people in Indiana rate those as really important to a successful community, more than the national average. So it's not that people in Indiana don't value education. Certainly, the role of schools in a community, the role of schools in kids' lives, is something that Hoosiers embrace very much. But when you get to the higher education front, that's where it starts to break down a little bit. And Hoosiers are proud of their communities and typically rate their communities as very good along 5 key indicators: opportunities for people to get ahead, the friendliness of people, the natural environment, access to quality healthcare, and then overall quality of life. People are generally satisfied with their communities, but when we ask them, how do you think Indiana ranks nationally on these, very few Hoosiers would put Indiana in the top 10 on any one of those indicators, let alone all 5. So there's room to grow there as well. The third study we did, as I mentioned at the outset, was on distressed communities, opportunity zones, and we did a kind of a fact-finding mission there, and also lots of interviews with stakeholders to get a sense of where Indiana stands. And this is important. I mean, opportunity zones, all 156 of them in Indiana, are home to over 500,000 people. They are more populated by minority Hoosiers than the state average. 36% of opportunity zones residents are minorities in Indiana, compared to just over 20% of the state as a whole. And so these are important places to focus on, to help generate an environment of more inclusive, widespread growth. And what we found is that compared to other states in the Midwest and even nationally, Indiana really stepped out of the gates quickly and accumulated some of the most exciting initiatives when we look at what's going on there compared to other states. And so that's been a really good thing. People in Indiana have really, consistent with Indiana's
Ryan, thank you. What an impressive body of work that you and your scholars have concluded here as well. A question for you, and also Mark, if you could come up for just a moment on this one. Each of you have touched on the major challenges and opportunities that we have, and suggested that in addition to state policymakers, and there's a lot for them to think about coming out of all this, there's also a pretty significant role for business leaders and a real role for regional leadership as well in thinking through these issues, and maybe in coming to terms with some of them even more directly than is possible in any other way. This study, as everybody with us here today knows, has been done from the ground up from the 11 regions that we have worked with all of you in. And I'm just curious, as each of you concludes your work here, how you come back to thinking about the findings you have, the recommendations you have through a regional lens. And obviously it's very topical, very important. Mark, you mentioned the states and the governor's focus on that as well. Yeah. just if you could put it in that framework for us a bit, that would help.
I'll jump in for a second. I know Ryan thinks about this a lot too. First, regions are already doing this work in many respects. They're on the field. Check out the big sidebars we have reviewing a lot of the activities that are ongoing, the really innovative things that are being hashed out at the regional level now and delivered. Think of, so regions are already on many of these initiatives. Regions innovation can serve as a source of their models. They're a source of innovation. Think of the broadband work that Wabash Heartland is doing, or the Marion County work in that area. Their work to pilot CBRS technology to deliver service may be opening up new options for the state. So that's another reason that regional work is important. And then regions and firms are not, are not the second best option in many respects. In many respects, they're the first best option. They're correctly placed to deliver services in regions, in local labor markets. They have personal relationships. They can leverage those. They can leverage the business community, and they can stir up enthusiasm and passion. So we just think from our national work, we increasingly think that regional delivery is in some ways the best way to deliver even state programs. It could be, the sweet spot may well be state support and investment in regions to deliver statewide benefits. I don't know what you think, Ryan, but that's certainly, we're sort of vehemently bottom up in our work.
Yeah, good comments. Likewise, and I agree very much with what Mark just said on all points. One, that regional thinking comes first, and that there's already a lot of good work going on in Indiana this way, in ways that I think some of your neighboring states even envy. So there's a lot to build on there. And I am also vigorously bottom up in these sorts of solutions too. I think that the importance of regions thinking like regions is the real challenge, of course, and getting beyond what can sometimes become zero-sum thinking when it comes to economic development projects, local communities competing with one another for a particular type of investment, which is very common all across the country, is sort of baked into often how we address these things. And as David mentioned, I was involved in the early days in the Regional Cities Initiative, and part of the impetus for that project was to experiment with getting beyond that type of zero-sum thinking, which was to help regions think as regions. And I think when part of what I do in my own work is I look at where people are moving and try to understand why, and look at where fast-growing places are. And sometimes by design, sometimes by happenstance, you'll see that a large metro or a metro region that's growing larger, that's a boomtown, has in its outlying areas figured out how what used to be maybe competitive economic centers of activity becoming sort of absorbed in that metro area as a complementary area. A place that used to actually manufacture and make things and has experienced decline there. Reinvents itself as a commuter community for people that want more housing, they want better, they want newer infrastructure, they want bigger house, they want to be close to their kids' school, and they're willing to make the commute. Or in today's economy, they're able to work remotely. I lived in Austin, Texas, which is everybody's favorite poster child of growth. I lived there for a couple of years, and that's part of the reason I believe very much people shouldn't just try to copy places. Like, I've been a part of conversations where people want to copy Austin. Austin grew for some very unique and reasons that are indigenous to it. But when you go out west of there into like the beginning of Hill Country, you see these old towns that used to be their own independent economic centers, which are now essentially extensions of that Austin metro area. They have their own culture, they have their own identity, but they now think of themselves as part of this regional area. You can find examples of this in and around Indiana as well. So I think that trying to create incentives for communities to work with the nearest center of the largest economic activity in that region, which that was factored into the thinking about these 11 regions and how they were designed, is this cooperative endeavor where places that used to think of themselves maybe in a competitive frame of mind are now complementary to that economic activity and actually leveraging and building on it.
Yeah, that's thank you both. Those are very helpful comments, and I would note too, if you go to our GPS website and take a look at the 11 regions that have made up this study, and click on through and get some of the underlying data, you'll see something that very much illustrates the points that both Ryan and Mark are making, and that is we have many regional similarities across the state, but there are also significant differences in the economic makeup, the industry makeup, the population makeup of the different regions that comprise the state. And another advantage of a regional strategy is it can really be tailored to meet the opportunities and challenges of that particular region. And again, we're very hopeful that this study and the work that you folks have done will support that and really give people the opportunities to come up with their best shots on goal to make some really big things happen. So thanks to both of you. We're going to be coming back to you a little later in the session here. What we thought we would do now would be to get some of our stakeholders to reflect a bit on your work and to take it into some of the things that they are trying to do to be responsive to the challenges and opportunities that you raise in the report. To do that, I want to bring in my colleague, our Senior Director of Engagement at CICP, Melissa Roberts. Melissa, who I think all of you here today know and have worked with over the course of this past 18 months, has really been our lead on point for pulling together this great effort, not only in working with our colleagues at the American Enterprise Institute and Brookings, but with all of you and with all of the regions of the state that have come together to put this together. So I'm going to ask Melissa to introduce our panelists and to walk them through some further discussion on this, and then we'll come back and just give you a few final thoughts. Melissa?
Thanks so much, David. And yes, we've got quite a lineup of people across the state in different regions and different stakeholders that can provide some different perspectives on some of the findings of all of this research, collectively the Indiana GPS project. Our first speaker is Kevin Breneger. He's president and CEO of the Indiana Chamber. Unfortunately, he had a conflict come up this morning. He's been asked to testify at a committee hearing. So we asked him yesterday to just record a couple of comments for you all about generally kind of the environment at the General Assembly this session, what the early priorities appear to be, as well as some of the Indiana Chamber's interests across this body of work, and how they're leveraging this information to support their agenda. Let's take a listen.
Despite the logistical challenges, the General Assembly is moving forward as normal as best they can. Some key priorities are a bill, Senate Bill 1, that provides lawsuit limitations on COVID-related lawsuits. That bill just passed yesterday and is headed down to the governor's desk. That was our top priority. It is a budget year, and so the state budget is front and center. The House Ways and Means Committee has passed their version of it. And in that bill includes one of the topics that were in the Brookings research and is a top priority as well, a high priority of the chamber, and that's broadband. This bill includes the $100 million for continued expansion of broadband across the state, and an additional $250 million. So it's a huge investment. There are several bills that pertain to broadband and how to expand it, how to utilize different monies. And so it ties directly into that research paper that was part of the overall Brookings report. And it's something that we're pushing very hard as well. And then the reason I'm not able to be with you this morning is that I am at the State House with several chamber members testifying on a bill to enact a work-share program within the state's unemployment insurance program. This would be an alternative for employers to the full layoffs that they have now during an economic downturn. Work-share would allow them to reduce the hours, of a grouping of employees, but keep them connected. They would continue to get their health care, their retirement benefits. And then when the economy picks up, the employer doesn't have to go look for new employees. They just raise the hours back up. During that period that they're on work share, the state would pay partial unemployment benefits. So it's really a win-win-win for employers, employees, and the state of Indiana. Indiana employers clearly want the option to use work share. And the Brookings research quantified some important metrics. It told us that during this pandemic, by not being a work share state, that as many as 34,000 Hoosiers became unemployed unnecessarily. It also quantified how much of federal money we lost that would have been available from the CARES Act had we been a work share state like 28 other states. And that amount could be as much as $116 million that could have helped shore up the balance of our unemployment insurance trust fund. So this research was extremely valuable in helping to make the case for passage of work share legislation. And we've used it, we think, very effectively and significantly with Indiana legislators. Many of the topics and policy recommendations in the Brookings research and the work that AI has done for the GPS project are also priorities of the Indiana Chamber. We are revamping our Vision 2025 plan due to the severe impact of the pandemic, and we intend to incorporate those policy papers into that effort, and we will carry those forward through our advocacy on the advocacy side of the chamber in future legislative sessions. And so this research has been invaluable and on many important topics that we think should be front and center in future discussions, both with governors and with the General Assembly.
Great. Thanks again to Kevin Breneger. Even though he couldn't be here today, we appreciated his willingness to provide those insights and commentary for today. So next I want to move to our next guest, Greg Watham. He's president and CEO of the Economic Development Coalition of Southwest Indiana. Evansville was a recipient of the Regional Cities Grants and created a comprehensive economic and place-making strategy. So Greg, welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Melissa. It's great to be here as well. You know, let me just take a quick step back. Getting the data right is incredibly important as it becomes really the foundation for any strategy that a state or region might deploy. And if the foundation is weak, then more than likely the strategies will fail as well. You know, on Twitter, I follow a Canadian music correspondent and blogger named Eric Alper, who hosts a show on Sirius XM. And I was struck by a recent tweet that he had put out, and he said, "We absolutely have no evidence that dinosaurs did not sing happy songs." Now, I know what you're thinking. What does that have to do with Indiana GPS or dinosaurs from that standpoint? If you don't look at the data, if you don't look at where you're going, you can't take that first step of an introspective look at the state and how well you will perform as a state. And candidly, you just will never know if the dinosaurs can't sing happy songs or not. One of the first steps we did as a region actually occurred in 2010 with the Garner Report. It was the most comprehensive report that we had done since the 1958 Fannis Report, and it came after the closing of Whirlpool's manufacturing facility in 2009. Looking at yourselves in the mirror can be difficult, but the data tracking process allowed us to be in a position to, as you said, to attract into the Regional Cities Grants that changed our community as to how we look at place and why place matters. How place can influence a region's ability to attract and retain talent. For nearly 2 years, our region has focused our efforts on Talent 2025, a comprehensive strategic approach as to how to change the trajectory of our region when it comes to health outcomes, poverty, educational attainment, population growth, as well as employment and wage growth. We track 33 specific metrics from 10 communities across the country, with 6 peer communities and 4 being aspirational. And from that data, we've laid out strategies specifically to change our region, and we're starting to implement tactics that will alter the course for Southwest Indiana. An important role that Indiana GPS project has played for Southwest Indiana is being able to validate what we saw with the Talent 2025 initiative, and the data analysis eerily very closely tracks to it. Lastly, I think Indiana as a whole, we have a tendency, like many other states, to focus our economic development efforts on transactions, going from project to project without really looking at the outcome. Because if your only metrics is jobs, we kind of already failed. Good data is the starting point, the foundation, but strategies and tactics need to come from that data, and you need to be able to accurately measure it as well.
Thank you so much, Greg. And that's a great kind of segue into one question I have, just to elaborate on a little bit, is you referenced the placemaking component of Evansville's strategy. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those key efforts and kind of what some of those metrics are that you're tracking as it relates to placemaking?
Absolutely. In terms of, again, there are 33 metrics that go everywhere from population to disability to poverty to healthcare, in terms of what do we look like from that standpoint, to education in terms of certificates, in terms of associate degrees, also in terms of bachelor's degrees, graduates from that standpoint. I mean, we've learned a lot specifically from both the Garner Report, Regional Cities, Talent 2025, and now the Indiana GPS project helps us really tell that story and measure the right data and lay out that comprehensive strategy specifically as we're moving forward. I think it tells us in particular, shows us very clearly we have to kind of move away from this transactional development strategy that many of us have focused on. And let me give you an example of that. 56% of all those individuals within our workforce, and when I talk about that, that's our 5-county market that we currently track, make somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000 a year. And I would dare say for all of us, that group will be vulnerable, especially as you're trying to integrate technology into the mix. So for us, the data is so incredibly important as we're laying out these strategies. And quality of place, you have to have the ability to attract in and retain talent. If your community doesn't focus on these various things, if you're just focused on transaction, we want to attract in the next company, the new company here, you're really missing the importance of changing the region. Because you can attract in a company, but if no one's there to help populate or employ those individuals because they just don't like the region itself, then you're probably going to fail in that regard.
Thank you so much for being with us today, and thanks for that perspective, Greg. Really appreciate it. Next, we're going to invite Claire Fidian Green to join us on your screen. She's the president of the Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation, and one of the 3 themes of the Brookings report centers around increasing digital adoption, and a clear prerequisite of that was deeply exposed by COVID-19 over the past year is access to broadband. So a number of partners in Central Indiana came together to launch a pilot program last fall to address this problem. So Claire, thanks again for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about the pilot program, how it's structured, and how it's progressing so far?
Sure. Thank you, Melissa, and thanks so much to you and David Johnson for including me in today's conversation. Let me start by explaining that the idea for developing the private network dedicated to e-learning for students from low-income households was conceived of last April, when it became clear the pandemic wasn't going away anytime soon. And in addition, what we heard from stakeholders in schools in Marion County was that COVID-19 had highlighted the longstanding homework gap that exists for children from low-income households. So the Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation, my organization, partnered with the Eli Lilly and Company Foundation and Mayor Joe Hogshead in the city of Indianapolis to create and launch the Indianapolis e-learning fund. Many other funders rallied quickly to support the effort, including Lilly Endowment, United Way of Central Indiana, the Mind Trust, and many others. The fund was focused specifically on addressing the connectivity and device needs of public school students in Marion County. After launching last April, we surveyed all 11 districts and 50 public charter schools in Indianapolis, representing about 150,000 students. And what we found was stunning. 25% of these students did not have access to high-speed internet, and they simply were not able to participate in e-learning. And the barrier was family income levels. So we partnered with leadership from CICP's Energy Systems Network and TechPoint, as well as Indiana 5G Zone and Cummins. And then we also spoke a lot and partnered with the chief technology officers from Marion County Schools to develop 2 RFPs through the e-learning fund, One was to procure hotspots and address short-term internet connectivity needs. But the second was seeking proposals to develop a permanent solution to address the family income-based digital divide in Marion County. That second RFP led to a strong final proposal, but no clear path forward to sustain that initiative with public dollars, especially in light of COVID-19 budget uncertainties. So last fall, as you mentioned, the Fairbanks Foundation, Lilly Endowment, and the City of Indianapolis, through some of its CARES Act funding, together granted $1.7 million to CICP Foundation to fund a pilot initiative in Marion County that's currently underway. And our goal with the pilot is to validate the technology, the CBRS spectrum that is being utilized, and then also to design an approach to governance and management that would allow us to scale this up for all low-income households in Marion County. The pilot project managers are Energy Systems Network and Indiana 5G Zone, and the technology partner is SBA Communications, a publicly traded company. And the pilot participants are 3 public school districts, Indianapolis Public Schools, Perry Township, and Lawrence Township, 2 public charter schools, and also Ivy Tech's Indianapolis campus. The use case that we're testing in the pilot is e-learning, both at the K-12 and the post-secondary level. And we're also exploring testing a telehealth use case. I mentioned the technology being utilized is Citizens Broadband Radio Service, or CBRS, which refers to a portion of the innovation band spectrum designated for shared use by the FCC. And the pilot is testing both on-campus and at-home connectivity and is structured as a business-to-business versus a business-to-consumer model. So to answer your question, how the pilot is going, we've made great progress. The contracts have all been signed with all of the pilot participants. The technology was purchased, and amazingly, with all the COVID-19 related shipping delays, has arrived and is being installed. And the pilot network will be up and running next month. We're going to start testing next month and go through the summer to validate our use cases. And then finally, I'll just say that technology is just one part of it. To actually scale it across all these different users across Marion County is going to take a lot of work to structure that in a way that makes sense. So we've launched a committee comprised of pilot participants and other state and local community stakeholders who are helping us think through governance, management, community engagement, and sustainability questions, importantly, funding, assuming that the pilot succeeds and we move to scale the solution countywide.
Great. Thank you so much, Claire. That was a really helpful kind of example for this group, I think, to hear about, and looking forward to finding ways to kind of expand and support the scaling up of such a pilot. So thanks a lot for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to introduce Tina Peterson. She's President and CEO of the Regional Opportunity Initiatives and the Community Foundation of Bloomington and Monroe County, and ask her to join this discussion. So thanks for being with us today, Tina.
Thank you.
So Tina, we've heard today, Indiana and all states are in need of more good jobs, those with the family sustaining wage and employer sponsored benefits. And your team at ROI has done a lot of work to help people develop skills needed to land a good job. And so hoping you could describe a couple of examples, particularly as you focused on STEM-based careers and how you've engaged employers in these efforts.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation today. Both an affirmation and inspiration, I think, for how we need to move forward as a region. We're very fortunate in the Indiana Uplands, our 11 county region in Southwest Central Indiana, that we've been able to take a very holistic approach to addressing education, workforce, and quality of place. The investment from Lilly Endowment has really made that possible for us, and we have been very focused on creating really a regionally relevant and demand-driven approach to advancing prosperity in this region through our 3 key sectors: advanced manufacturing, life sciences, and defense. And in fact, just keying off some of the data today, we know over a decade period that growth in all jobs in our region was about 4%, but growth in those 3 sectors was 10%. So incredibly important to advancing prosperity in this very rural part of Indiana. The strategy that we've taken is what we call Ready Schools, and Ready Schools is an approach where we intend to build talent for our region. Certainly, we have to focus on quality of place initiatives for attraction and retention, and we need to focus on training and upskilling our adult workforce. But for the long term, we have to build our own talent pipeline. And we've done that by really looking at systems change across schools in our region, 27 school districts. 15 of them now have been through this process with us to really rethink the way we are preparing young people for the jobs that exist today. And that involves really thinking about creating STEM literate individuals with the core competencies, the soft skills, and the employability assets needed to really be effective. Through rethinking schools using design thinking strategies and engaging all of our stakeholders, we have seen a real change in the way we are offering opportunity to our students, beginning with embedding STEM, really STEM engaged educators in elementary schools across our region, to through STEM fellowships, building STEM pathways, preparing young people to take advantage of opportunities at the high school level, and seeing a real emphasis on computer science, biomed, engineering, and cybersecurity. We even have recently created a new certification program for drone pilots. So, really seeing schools think about education in a different way, student-run businesses, digital fabrication labs, future centers within our buildings, Project Lead the Way that begins in elementary school and takes us all the way through high school. Most importantly, we really believe that we have to focus not only on preparing these young people, but in aligning what's happening in K-12 with their post-secondary decision-making, an area where we see an incredibly large gap with only 1 in 6 children in our region participating in a relevant pathway, but then choosing a post-secondary education or a job aligned with that pathway after high school. And so a very significant focus now on a career coaching fellowship and a career guidance fellowship and an upskill work and learn and apprenticeship program that is really going to be much more deliberate about connecting what's happening in K-12 with what we need to see in our post-secondary years. All of this built off of our relationships with our employer partners who really guide and lead this work. It's been a key tenet from the beginning that we needed to understand exactly what our challenges were, and we do that through an occupational needs assessment that sees our key employers actually provide us with the data and the information about the jobs that they are having difficulty filling. And in our region, that's engineering, technology, science, and manufacturing related areas. And so the work is really driven by, grounded in the specific needs of our region. And we see employers sitting at every table in our region as we focus on everything from quality of place to digital inclusion, which for us is an incredibly important topic. And just really beginning to address those emerging needs we have and technological sophistication in this region. Even trying to make sure Catalent has the workforce that they need as they are addressing vaccine challenges in our country, and seeing our employers really think about innovation and how they educate their own workforce, creating STEM program in schools as employers, and really leading the way in diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations and actions in our community.
Thank you so much, Tina. That was wonderful and really a wonderful example of how a region can bring together, schools, employers, and industry to really make sure that there's a clear pathway for workers to find the right career path for them. So I know there's so much more to dig into there. We've just got about 15 minutes left, so I want to make sure we keep moving. But thanks so much for being with us today, Tina. We know we'll hear more from you as ROI continues to work. So next, I would like to move to Marshawn Wally. He is President and CEO of Black Onyx Management, which is a Black-owned management consulting firm and public benefit corporation that supports organizations with diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Welcome, Marshawn. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, quick question for you. As you know, given your experience and background, and Brookings has also reiterated in its report, Indiana is in need of strengthening its entrepreneurial activity, particularly as it relates to minority-owned businesses, to help revitalize our economy. So, given the important role that entrepreneurship plays in our economy, how can our state better support startup and existing minority-owned business enterprises, in your opinion?
No, that's an excellent question. And many of the findings actually in the Indiana GPS study were affirmational to efforts that are happening in the community as we seek to work with the business community. There's a Citigroup study that showed that $13 trillion was lost in the past 20 years due to Black entrepreneurs not receiving equitable financing or not understanding how to access traditional financing. And access to capital has been a major issue. Black Enterprise Magazine did a survey of 2,600 businesses and found that 80% of businesses expressed this as a major problem. In a recent JP Morgan Chase study in the market, identified $4.1 to $5.3 billion in equity financing needs, with Black and Latinx businesses having the highest level of unmet demand. When reviewing the study, things that jumped out for us was transparency and accountability in government MWBE or XBE programs. That looks like the posting of data for contracts and the progress towards meeting stated goals, either at the state level or at the city level. And then the other thing that the community has called for is a disaggregation of data by race, particularly in Indianapolis, so that there's a better understanding of where contract dollars are going. The Cdfi strategy that was lifted up in the report is actually something that my company is working on. We've noted that Missouri actually has one of the best Black business concentrations. They have 23 Cdfis, and when we think about the challenge of accessing traditional banks and the role that Cdfis play in that, we think that that's an important strategy that we'll be working on to try to move forward. We also felt that the state loan reserve fund is going to be key to support just the losses that happen with Cdfis. Programs that we're actually also involved in include a Black Businesses Matter program, where we take businesses and we try to help them tell their story. We help with helping them leverage earned media opportunities, and then also pro bono services. The other thing that we do is at a local level have a program called India Accomplishment, where we partner with corporations to help them with their equity and diversity needs. But from a state level, just the transparency and accountability for the MWBE programs that are currently on the books, disaggregation of data by race, and then the ideas lifted up as far as supporting a Cdfi strategy, a statewide Cdfi strategy, as well as a state loan reserve fund, were things that jumped out at us as pretty important and significant.
Great. Thank you so much for that perspective and insight, Marshawn. Thanks for being with us today. Next, I'd like to move to our next guest, Teresa Lubbers. Teresa is Commissioner of the Indiana Commission for Higher Education and a former Senator of 17 years. So thanks for joining us, Teresa. Great to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So given your role with the Commission and your lengthy experience in workforce development at the state level, there are a number of state programs and grants highlighted by this Brookings report as successful initiatives that should be expanded and continued if possible. So can you briefly tell us about the Next Level Jobs Initiative and Workforce Ready grants, and what regional efforts should think about in terms of leveraging these programs to align with their own strategies?
I'd like to begin just by thanking CICP and Brookings and AEI for the quality of this work, which I think is informing the work that we do at the state level as well as just the commitment it shows to Indiana. I think it's worth noting the names of the studies and the reports we're looking at. Ryan referred to A Time to Change, The name of this report is State of Renewal. I think it aligns with the Commission's strategic plan, which is called Reaching Higher in a State of Change. It was adopted in the end of 2019. And the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, which looks at that through a better future for every Hoosier. So just the titles of those reports tell us, I think, that all of us are working to make sure that Hoosiers are prepared for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. In particular, Indiana's Next Level Jobs Initiative was created in 2017, and it contains two critical pieces. One is the Workforce Ready Grant, which is really focused on individuals, making sure that they get the training and education they need for a good job. And the other is the Employer Training Grant, which is aimed at employers. The Workforce Ready Grant actually provides tuition-free certificates in 5 of Indiana's high-demand areas. Those include advanced manufacturing, business and IT, health and life sciences, IT and business services, and transportation and logistics. These were selected to align with Indiana's current and projected job needs. And we're really focused on making sure that an individual who received one of these certificates could build personal prosperity and well-being, that we would be meeting the needs of the employers in Indiana, and that by doing all this, we would be growing and strengthening Indiana's economy. I think it's worth noting also that since we started the program, over 21,000 Hoosiers have earned one of these high-value workforce-ready grants. And additionally, we have 41,000 Hoosiers who are currently enrolled in these programs. So we know the program is working, and we know that because there is a median wage gain by getting one of these certificates. Hoosiers with a Workforce Ready grant see a $6,800 median annual wage gain. And I think it's also interesting and important to note that Black Hoosiers and men are overrepresented in the Workforce Ready grant compared to the population at large of Indiana. And that's very important because we know those two populations have been left behind. The Employer Training Grant has been successful as well. More than nearly 3,000 employers have been engaged, and there have been 26,500 trainees who have received the kind of training they need for a good job, with a median annual wage gain of $5,900. About $8 million of this has been obligated to minority, women, and veteran-owned firms. So we know it's beginning to address that issue as well. We were able, because of the creation of the Governor's Workforce Cabinet in 2018, we've been able to scale our programs and take advantage of federal dollars as well as state dollars as well. And of course, all of this really relies on regional work, making sure that we've looked at the specific job needs that we have by regions of the state. I think as the program continues to develop, we're going to be looking for more intentional ways to do that. All of this helping really Indiana meet its big goal that 60% of Hoosiers would have a quality credential beyond high school by 2025.
Great. It's so great to hear how successful that program has been, and that it's really kind of pointing to a couple of our key challenges that this Indiana GPS project report has identified as kind of these longer term pre-existing conditions. So thank you, Teresa, for joining us today and kind of giving us some more information about those programs and how regions can work with the state to leverage those. So I know we're short on time, but I do have one more guest I'd like to introduce, and then we'd like to still try to give you a quick demo of a Brookings website where some of this data is housed, as well as answer a few of your questions. So I would like to introduce Thomas Miller, President and CEO of Thomas P. Miller and Associates, to your screen. Tom, thanks for joining us today. Your organization does a lot of work both within the state of Indiana and nationally around workforce and economic development, even with the Commission on Higher Education and Department of Workforce Development. So, Tom, given the work that you've done around the state and the country in these areas, what's your sense of the importance of this moment for Indiana, and how do you think these studies will have impact in some of the smaller and more rural communities around the state?
Thanks, Melissa. I want to note, as Teresa did, thanks to Brookings and AEI, Ryan Streeter, and Mark for the excellent work they did. Thanks to CICP for sponsoring that work and Lily for funding it. I'm going to double down on what Brookings and AEI, I think, as we think about how to address the issues and opportunities laid out in the report, this is a bottoms-up type of effort. The real work, the laboratory for innovation, occurs at the regional level. And so I would also endorse that thing. I'm going to introduce a new word. I think it is important. It's at a critical moment in Indiana's history, coming off the pandemic. I want to introduce the notion that we need to have some sense of urgency as we approach this. It's possible to really begin to scale some of the things that actually are working in Indiana, and as well as adapt and look at best practices in other parts of the notion. But I do hope that everyone that's joined us today, as they reflect later this afternoon, think of the sense of urgency that needs to be brought to this work at the regional level.
Thank you so much, Tom. That's really helpful context for us to keep in mind. So thank you for being with us today. Really appreciate it. At this point, we would like to ask our colleagues at Brookings, Mark Muro and Rob Maxim, to join us again. They're going to show us a quick demonstration for their landing page for the Indiana GPS project, which houses regional data across the state that informed their report in a unique interactive design that's publicly available, as well as a spreadsheet available by download of some more of that detailed information. So we will share that URL briefly in a moment in the chat function, so you can also access it directly. But Mark, if you could just tell us a little bit about this website that Brookings has created, and just a quick 60-second overview of how our audience here can use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to hear from everyone this morning. So just a couple notes while my colleague Rob will see if he can share screen so you can just see this. So, you know, this is a state report, yes, but you get the drift that we see it as a state plus regions report. The state economy is the sum total of 11 regions. The trends are playing out in variable ways. So we built in, you know, all along our work has been focused on the interplay of regions and the state. We've wanted to aid and abet you in the regions, and obviously we've gathered quite a lot of data, much in the report, but much outside the report. So what we've done is, you know, created a website and placed on at Brookings EDU, where, you know, our landing page, which you can see here, is, and we've built a simple interactive data map to allow you to quickly get a feel for trends in your region. Scroll down to the middle. Rob will go over this, and then we've also posted a data appendix. So you can both see trends, but also we've created a data appendix, which has something like 18 more layers of data that you can download. Rob, do you want to just provide a quick, yeah, here's a look at the data appendix, the contents of it, and then all of this is downloadable. Rob, do you want to just make any comments? And
hey, Mark, sure thing. So, you know, the only thing I'd add, and we can just head back to the interactive here. You know, as you can see, you can scroll through a variety of different indicators, both static indicators and then indicators over time and how they've changed. You know, I think that's hugely important because, you know, some of the static indicators, things like total employment, are going to be based on just population size, but things like, you know, percent change in employment over time, you can, there's a lot that you can dive into here. You know, you can see, for example, several regions were actually starting this crisis with less employment overall than they went into the last crisis with. That's, you know, obviously a major economic factor for those regions. I think that's kind of the only thing on top of what you have said that I'd add, but, you know, I'll just note too that, you know, we're of course happy to support regions however we can. So if there's data that anyone's curious about that's not available to download immediately, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Great, thanks Rob and Mark for that so much. Again, we'll be putting this website here in the chat momentarily so you can access it directly. It's also available on the website we have created at CICP, IndianaGPSproject.com. That's also where you can access all of these reports under the collection of research we've discussed today. Remarkably, we're already at time, so we have several questions here that we will respond to that you have submitted offline and follow up with you individually to get back to you on those questions. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and send it back to David Johnson. And again, look forward to continuing this conversation with you. We're certainly looking at other ways to engage in the coming months on the breadth of research that we have here. So thanks, David.
Thank you, Melissa, very much. And thanks for all your terrific work in pulling all this together. Very grateful to Ryan Streeter and Mark Muro and Rob Maxson for your leadership throughout and your very helpful comments here today. To all of our speakers this morning, to the CICP team who has put all this together, and to all of you who participated with us today and throughout this process and who we are delighted to be working with. And now we can see all the many good things we can do together moving forward by being able to draw on these reports and the immense amount of collegiality and goodwill that has brought them together. So again, I want to emphasize there's a lot of information here. This is something that will inform our activities for not only months but really years to come. And the best way to get into all that, I think, is to do what Melissa was suggesting here right at the end, and that is to go to our website, IndianaGPSproject.com. It's all one word. And that website will lead you into all of the other information, including all of the reports, the Brookings Interactive regional materials, all of that. And at the same time, you can also contact us or others through that as well. It will be a working website. We will continue to build it as we roll all this out. But go to it, work with it, begin to learn the functionality of it, and let's continue our conversations and work together. Thanks, everybody, again, for joining us today. We look forward to the future. Thanks.